Welcome to another episode of Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Zielinski. In this episode, our guests will be talking about their Patient and Community Engagement Research, or PaCER, internship study focusing on understanding patient experiences of living with chronic pain and coping strategies that patients use to manage their chronic pain, a qualitative, patient-led Canadian study. The Patient and Community Engagement Research, or also known as PaCER, program, based at the University of Calgary, works toward transforming the role of patients in health system research, practice, planning, and policy, with the aim to create more sustainable and effective person-centered care. To learn more about the PaCER program, you can go to episode 1 of the PaCER series with Dr. Maria Santana, the scientific director, and Ingrid Nielsen, the instructor for the PaCER program. In today's episode, I'm excited to introduce you to Jamie Hodge, Marcia Bruce, and Elena Lopatina. Jamie Hodge is a recent graduate of the PaCER program and has been a volunteer for Alberta Health Services for the past 7 years. He has been actively involved in various health quality councils and joined clinical staff and unit managers in leader-rounding activities. He has also assisted the Advanced Geriatric Unit staff in developing a comprehensive strategy to improve the patient and family experience. He was recently appointed as one of 2 public representatives on the Provincial Primary Care Network Committee, which reports directly to the Minister of Health with recommendations specific to the roles, responsibilities, and funding requirements of zone and local primary care networks. Marcia Bruce is a patient advisor for Alberta Health Services and a patient research partner at the University of Calgary. As a patient and community engagement researcher, she is focused on using patient-informed research evidence to inform and improve healthcare planning, policy, and practice. Marcia is currently contributing to several patient-centered research projects and initiatives in the areas of digestive health, chronic pain, and infectious disease. And Dr. Elena Lopatina is a senior scientist with the Alberta Virtual Chronic Pain Program and the Alberta Pain Strategy, Strategic Clinical Networks at Alberta Health Services. She is also an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Community Health Sciences, Cummings School of Medicine at the University of Calgary. Her embedded research program focuses on the design, implementation, evaluation, and ongoing development of the Alberta Virtual Chronic Pain Program and shaping the learning health system for chronic pain management in Alberta. I'm just going to start us off by asking what brought you to the PaCER program, Jamie, and can you share some background information about your project and why you chose this topic?
Sure. Like to do that, Sandra. All right. I came to Alberta back in about 10 years ago as a widower because of my experience with my spouse and her struggle with cancer, which ultimately took her life. I wanted to get back I wanted to do something, give back to the healthcare community that I felt was so good to us at the time. So I became a advisor and volunteer with Alberta Health Services. Initially, I did some wayfinding and worked as an emergency department volunteer at South Health Campus. Then subsequently to the Rocky Hospital, where I did pretty much the same thing in the emergency department up to the point that the COVID pandemic started. I remarried in 2019. The lady that I am married to now suffers from chronic pain and has for many, many years. And I didn't have any idea what it would be like to live with somebody, to care for somebody and be there for somebody that suffered this kind of pain, and it just doesn't go away. Interestingly enough, I believe it was the summer of 2020, say, I attended a virtual patient engagement network discussion sponsored by, I believe it was Joanne Ganton with AHS. And one of the people at that discussion was Karen Moffat. And Karen Moffat, I remember to this day, talked about her having chronic pain, how difficult her life was as a consequence, and how she sort of tried to live day to day. And she also mentioned something called the PaCER program that was available through the University of Calgary continuing education. So after that meeting, I went online, found out a little bit about PaCER, made an application to become a student. And I got sort of a bit of a runaround. And finally, all of a sudden, I got this thing saying, you're enrolled in a PaCER program to start at the University of Calgary. I think it was January 19th or something, and you're being sponsored by someone called Tracy Waslick, who is the operations officer for the Alberta SCNs. So that's kind of how I got into it. I almost fell into it by accident. And I think it was just being persistent and kept emailing and asking them what was happening that I got to that point. Anyway, I went to the first meeting and discovered that I had already been put into a cohort with some other people that Tracy Waslick, through the SCNs, their SCN involvement, had put together. And we were all interested. And somewhere along the line, I forgot to mention that I was interested in chronic pain. Anyway, we were put in, turns out we were, there was 4 of us that were in a cohort called the painkillers. We were all either caregivers or, in the case of my partners in this cohort, people with chronic pain and had chronic pain for at least 3 months, and in fact, usually more than well beyond 12 months into the period of years. So the 4 of us that came together in that group, myself, Karen Moffat, interestingly enough, the lady who got me interested, Sophia Khan, and another lady, Pamela Pyle, who both her and her spouse had chronic pain issues, but Pamela in particular, and had for many years. So that's how we came together. One of the first things PaCER tells you or teaches you is to set ground rules as to how you will function as a team, get to know each other, that becoming a team, people with various backgrounds and experiences and so on, you have to build trust and learn to cooperate and take advantages of each other's strengths, being as well aware of their weaknesses so that you can function and do things. I mean, here's a group of people that are strangers one day, and all of a sudden the next day we're brought together and we have to carry out a fairly complex patient-led qualitative health study. So I don't know, that's a little bit about myself, how I got into it, the team that we ultimately ended up becoming. And the balance of the year, again, I think it was 2021. Marcia may be able to help me with that. Marcia, by the way, became, I called her our mentor, but I think she is a support person to help us, get over some of the rough spots. And we had rough spots. Didn't always agree as a group with the way we wanted to go, but with, again, quite a bit of help and assistance from Marcia. We finished the program. We produced a report, which you may not probably by now know was actually published by in the British Medical Journal, I think 2 years ago now.
Marcia, do you want to talk a little bit about your role as team support and a little bit about yourself, what brought you to support this team as well?
Yeah, sure. As a patient with chronic disease myself, I got involved in PaCER a couple years earlier. And the painkillers was actually my first cohort that I supported as a team sport. So they asked me to come back and help another team through the PaCER program. And it was one of the best things I've ever done. I learned so much from the team, and I learned it was nice to kind of do PaCER again. It was almost like, even though I was the team support, I was also still learning and really getting better grounding in the approach. And So yeah, it was a great experience. And then I went on to work with a few more cohorts after Jamie and the painkillers. And it's just been a lovely job and a great way to contribute and learn more.
I should go back a bit if I could, Sandra, to talk about and explain how we found the research topic that we ultimately researched. Because all of us had chronic pain, all of us were interested in how do we deal with chronic pain on a daily basis within the team. And I spoke on behalf of my experience with my spouse. We all had different ways of coping. Through the four of us, through our own personal relationships, identified a group of people that we knew were either caregivers or chronic pain sufferers themselves. And we worked with them to co-design our final topic, which was experiences of people living on a daily basis with chronic pain, coping strategies, and that sort of thing. So that was, if you will, our set session. Out of that, then we learn about research in general and how to conduct focus groups, interviews, and carried on for there. We are now carrying out, if you will, a bit of an extension study to understand some things about people with chronic pain and how they use or don't use online resources, for example.
That's a good segue to bring Elena in. And do you want to share a little bit about your role, Elena, with this team and how you've gotten involved?
Yes, gladly. I actually connected with the team after the painkillers work and report was conducted and completed, or maybe at the very last stages, because when I met everyone was very stressed about completing their PaCER program requirements. But at that time, I was a postdoctoral fellow with the Alberta Pain Strategy. Tracy Wadzaluk was and currently still is my mentor, and I was working on evaluation and implementation of models of care for chronic pain management. And I was told about this PaCER work, and the report was shared. I read this amazing work and recommendations that the PaCER work provided for health system design and healthcare providers working with patients with chronic pain management. And I was impressed by the findings and the message and how everything was structured and put together. And coming from a researcher perspective, my first thought was, we must publish this. This has to be a peer-reviewed publication. So I started working with the team and Marcia to put this together as a manuscript first, which was submitted and then published. But we also worked together on several grant applications and proposals. So I've been very lucky to continue working with this team to date. And one of the proposals that we submitted was for a CIHR Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis Research Excellence Award, which highlighted patient engagement within Alberta Pain Strategy. And of course, this PaCER work was one of the major examples of this work. And we were successful in this application and were able to secure some CIHR funding, which we're now using to support the second PaCER study that Jamie just mentioned.
And we'll probably talk a little bit more about that near the end. This is great. We've set the stage, so now we can dive in a little bit deeper to learn more about the first PaCER study that was done. So thanks for setting the stage. Can you talk about your recruitment strategy and what that looked like? So what kind of inclusion, exclusion criteria you had, who were the participants, a little bit of demographics around the people that you spoke to, and how to plan your recruitment and then execute it.
Okay, it was obvious once we knew what we wanted to study. So we were looking for people that had chronic pain, which at that time we defined as people having pain for at least 3 months and longer, who were adults and who lived in Alberta. Exclusion were people under the age of 18, people that didn't have chronic pain, essentially.
Yeah. So Marcia, do you want to expand on the data collection and what that looked like and how that happened?
Yeah, we actually had 11 participants in total. And an interesting thing was although the definition of chronic pain is 3 months, we actually set our inclusion criteria to be people who were experiencing chronic pain for at least 2 years. And that one sticks out to me because when we submitted our manuscript, they came back and said, well, if the definition of chronic pain is 3 months, why did you set your criteria for 2 years? And I think because this was a patient-led study, that's one of the reasons that we did, because our patients, Jamie and the team, said, well, if you've only had chronic pain for 3 months, you probably haven't figured out coping strategies yet. You're still you're still trying to figure out why you hurt. So the team felt that for somebody to be able to contribute to the study, they would need to have significant chronic pain experience. And so we recruited people with chronic pain experience. And it's actually one of the things that we were excited about it, as well as the diversity. Although we only had 11 people, we had young people, we had older people, we had people suffering with chronic pain for different reasons, whether it was post-surgery or whether it was a complication from a disease or a diagnosis. We really did feel like we got a diverse look at pain from different perspectives with the inclusion criteria that we had and the recruitment strategy that we employed.
And so do you want to start talking a little bit about the methods you use for data collection and what that looked like?
We used the PaCER approach, which includes focus groups and interviews with patients. So we were able to conduct a collect focus group with, I think, 6 people. And then we had 5 interviews in addition to that focus group. And from a research effective use of time, focus groups are great because you get a bunch of people in a room for a certain amount of time. But in order to accommodate patient needs and patient schedules, sometimes interviews are needed to be able to fit around their schedules. And some people don't want to share their stories in a public forum. So I think the PaCER approach is nice from that perspective because it allows us to have the focus groups and the interviews and then bring all of that data together. And then the team did coding of the data, and they did narrative analysis on some of the interviews as well. So that was quite a process to go through. I think a normal research team wouldn't necessarily have all of the team members do all of the coding, but because PaCER is a student-led, we want everybody to get the experience and exposure to coding. And so we had all of the team members do the coding, and then we had several meetings to come to consensus on the codes. And then we rolled those up into our final themes.
And then Jamie, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the main themes that emerged from your data?
Oh, I'd love to. That's the best part of it. We wanted to understand what chronic pain people were using to manage their pain, what coping strategies they used on a Monday, a Tuesday, Wednesday, every day of the week, year after year, month after month. The first major theme we came across is that we identify that there's a number of elements to chronic pain, and also that chronic pain it's a journey. It's a journey that happens as long as the chronic pain is in your life, and it's a difficult journey up to the point where finally either a person gets a diagnosis as to the reasons for that pain, so they're validated. They're no longer, looked at as being crazy people and just imagining stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And they can accept it. But after the acceptance phase, the journey becomes easier. Chronic pain is a process of grief, and it comes back depending on where you are in your life and different events that occur and so on. So there's this grieving process that continues all the way along. I mean, you grieve for the fact that perhaps you can't plan a year ahead of time anymore because you don't know if because of pain you'll be able to, let's say, go on a vacation or do some activity. There's a grieving for the fact that perhaps you've lost your income, your means of support, and how will you look after your children. You deal with it. You maybe get to the acceptance, and all of a sudden you're back again with, grieving some other aspect of the way your life has changed in an unpredictable or unforeseen way. So that we found to be incredibly interesting, and I think it was quite a surprise.
Mm-hmm. Marcia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just thought it was very interesting. And again, I think part of the process, because this was a patient-led study, we set out to find those daily coping strategies. But as we listened to our participants and we digested their data and really, delved into the data, the team was like, well, we can't just describe coping strategies because the coping strategies depend on these other things. And I feel like if it wasn't patients analyzing that data, they may have just stuck with the research question, what are the coping strategies, and come up with the coping strategies. But I think what we got, because it was patients who were analyzing that data, was just a much better story about coping strategies and the things that affect those coping strategies, like where you are in your life and where you are in your diagnosis, if you're experiencing grief and the grief that Jamie was just describing. That was a profound finding. And the fact that you don't just grieve once, you have to grieve over and over again as you go through different parts of your life. So I think, and again, it was a little weird. Like, you ask a research question, you're supposed to answer the research question. So why did we go beyond our research question? It's because it was an important part of the story. You can't just tell coping strategies. You can't just report coping strategies. You have to know the other pieces.
There's the additional context to those coping strategies. I can very much relate to that, as a person living with chronic disease, and also my PaCER internship was called the Hidden Pathways of Chronic Illness, and we had some similar findings through that. It's not like a ladder where you climb up and you just get better and now you're like, I've got it, I'm up here, we just stay up here. No, it's more like, a pendulum where you can swing back and forth and come to lows and have to deal with the lows, and then maybe the lows aren't as low as the first time, but there's still lows, and you come back up, and sort of, it's constantly changing, depending, like you said, on the context of what's happening in your life, but then also the context of what you're dealing with, because new things come and we need to adapt as humans to the new, whatever's presenting in our health. And so there's always this adapting phase, right? So yeah, I can very much relate to that. And thanks for sharing. Super interesting. Can you share some of the strengths and limitations of your research? And I know, Elena, maybe this is a good topic for you to talk about some of the strengths, because you've identified this as really important research, and we're going to expand on it in another research project.
I think the major strength is that it was conducted by patients. As Marcia mentioned, as a traditional researchers, we're often focused on traditional academic researchers. We're focused on this research question. We have to get to this research question, but we don't really think beyond that. Or sometimes we might miss the important details that are important from the patient perspective. So having patients conducting that research, doing it in an iterative way so that the new topic comes up and it's incorporated in the interview, it's incorporated in the reflect groups or collect groups. And also having patients interpreting the findings, interpreting them using their own words, makes it so relevant and so relatable. I remember one of the patient advisors on the Alberta Pain Strategy Committee reacting to the presentation of PaCER work during the steering committee meeting. She's been living with chronic pain for a long time, and she was absolutely impressed by this finding of grief, because that's something that she had experienced for a long time, but she didn't really put it in those words. And when she heard the presentation and this concept and theme of grief, she could relate to it so much. It just made so much sense. And I think that is one of the major examples why it is so valuable that it is patients who are working with patients and conducting that research. And I also think that, especially in the chronic pain community, patients have been failed by the healthcare system so many times. And often people don't feel comfortable, or they don't feel even welcome to share those details, especially when they're talking to a healthcare provider or a researcher who's coming with their own lens and trying to get to that detailed question that they're looking at. But I think patients working as a bridge between that patient who they are talking to and the knowledge that is generated, I think they are creating that environment where patients are actually able to open up, but they're also are able to hear it and put it in the data and interpret it so that it is actually included in the findings. I don't know any other way to get it there, especially in the populations where there's so much untrust and disappointment with the healthcare system, like chronic pain.
Anytime somebody encounters some kind of stigmatization when they try to access care, that closes somebody off a little more and a little more, and then that lack of trust starts happening where they're like, you know, I'm not even going to go for help because I know what this looks like if I go to emergency, or, you know, and maybe they're accused of just seeking for pain meds or something along those lines. So those stigmas create issues as well. So it's very validating to have this perspective with the patients and the interpretation of the data and stuff to really like bring that component around the grief for additional context to then figure out the coping strategies, is dealing with some of these things first, and then, okay, how can I build these coping strategies? And sorry, Marcia, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to say how much I love like hearing stories like what Elena just shared about when people either watch our presentation or read our work and they can relate to it. This is a lot of work. Patient-oriented research is a lot of work, right? And it feels so good to know that someone read it or someone heard a presentation and they related to it, and maybe they felt a little less alone, because suffering from chronic pain or having a chronic disease, it can be very isolating and you can feel very alone. And I watched it happen in the focus groups, even the coming together and not really feeling alone. And so thank you for sharing that, Elena. It just makes me feel great that someone could read our work and maybe find some peace in it and relatability.
Somebody that work impacts the most, that actually is living with it. And I always say, like, even if that work reaches one person with lived experience where they connect to that, it's like that's everything, right?
And that's just one example. I brought up this paper that was published based on the report during the development of the virtual chronic pain program, group-based program. And one of the topics is specifically focused on how pain affects mental health and how it affects daily living. So I thought, talking to facilitators, I recommended them to read this paper, and the clinicians, facilitators, decided to actually incorporate it even in the program structure, because everyone could relate it to so much. And every time when it comes up, everyone can relate to it. I've never seen it with any other study I've done with administrative data analysis or even qualitative research. Everyone can relate to it.
And then, Marcia, do you want to talk about some of the limitations for the work?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we really had hoped to do was have more diversity, right? Socioeconomic diversity. Although we felt like we had great diversity in age, we had genders, we did have people with different backgrounds and experiences. I don't know, recruiting people that don't have access to a computer, who it's harder to reach some of those populations, and so I would have loved to do a better job at getting it even more diverse than we were able to. And just some people say that the sample size maybe would be a limitation, but again, I felt like we had very robust conversations with our group, and we really did. We got a lot from them, and whether they were young or old or male or female, they related to each other's stories, and they reinforced kind of our key themes. When we brought them back for reflect, they were really happy with how we presented the data, and what we had heard from them, and they really helped us take it to the next level. So yeah, I think those were the main limitations that we noted.
Recruitment's one of the hardest parts of research. It's the hardest, yeah. So what were some of the specific recommendations from the participants in your research?
We had come up with a number of recommendations, and the exciting thing is that even with Elena bringing us back to do this next study on the virtual pain strategy, we're getting to help make sure that some of our recommendations come to fruition. So there was recommendations around multidisciplinary care. Chronic pain affects lots of pieces of your life, and you can't just see one doctor. You might be seeing multiple doctors and other like physiotherapists or massage, like how do you try to package care as a whole? There was a lot around actually working with people with chronic pain to understand and build things. And so again, that's a recommendation that's being put into action as the team continues to work with Tracy and Elena on the next goals. Mental health obviously came up as a big piece, and maybe I'll just do a plug, that grief thing again. Like I think every time we talk about grief, we're all struck by how profound it was. And maybe a third study, Elena, maybe we should start planning our third PaCER study. We should do one specifically on grief and chronic pain, because I think that's one that would just resonate with everyone. And the fact of preventative versus just turning to drugs and medicine and prescription. I think that kind of encompasses the recommendations.
One that I thought we identified, and I think it has implications for this next bit of research we're doing. I heard quite consistently people that we interviewed and attended the focus or the reflect especially session, that they wanted a place they could go to where others with chronic pain, where they could just chit chat, like a support.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're talking about coping strategies, and so that's that peer-to-peer connection, and people figure things out. When you're living with it 24/7, you figure things out, right? You have to. Have you had an opportunity to share your results anywhere?
We have our publication, which was exciting, right?
We can link that to this episode as well. We can link it.
Excellent. And that was a case of Elena mentoring the mentor. So she really helped me. That was my first, as a patient researcher, that was my first manuscript, and it was a great learning experience. And we just felt so compelled to share the stories of the patients that we worked with through the process. So that was sort of step one. And I think the team has had an opportunity to present at AHS. We've Jamie and I actually did the journal club with SPORE. Or ABS4U, and we've taken every opportunity that's come forward to kind of share our study. We did have a poster, right, Jamie, at the conference a couple of months ago. So we have done. We did a poster actually for both studies at that conference. So
good.
Yeah, it still kind of feels like just the beginning. Like there's so many more places we could share.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue to talk to Elena about what's next. So to get more into how this study has led to the next study. And Elena, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I would love to, and that's why I love working with Marcia and Jamie and the whole team. There's always more work to do, and they're excited about it. So we got some funding through the Research Excellence Award that we received, and we decided to use that funding to inform the design and implementation of the virtual chronic pain program. And maybe to step back, even the proposal for the virtual chronic pain program, which is now being funded through the Alberta government, did include a reference to those statements and those findings that came out from the PaCER report, and that recommendation that came up that the services should be delivered with patients is totally in alignment with how Alberta Pain Strategy has been working to date, and also how we continue working on this virtual chronic pain program. And that piece of peer support worker and peer support engagement being so critical has also been integrated in the virtual chronic pain program. So now the group-based program that started not only includes facilitator clinician-led sessions, which are more educational, but they also include peer support worker-led sessions where actually people can talk about the topic. They can actually talk to each other, see how to implement those strategies. So these findings continue to actually inform real practice to date. But going back to the new study, the reason how we actually decided to do it was first to inform that virtual chronic pain program. And it goes back to that limitation that Marcia mentioned. And I think it's not unique to this study. Unfortunately, we don't see everyone engaging in research. Not everyone has opportunities to do that. And people who often are mostly struggling with the healthcare system and don't have enough supports, they're also often underrepresented in any research, unfortunately. So when I was talking to one of the patient advisors, about this specific topic because the virtual chronic pain program really wants to target those patients who don't have access to any care. And I was wondering, how can we actually get to the point where we would actually understand how we would reach out to those populations, or how we would make people who don't trust the healthcare system open up, and instead of saying, oh, I didn't finish this self-management program because I didn't have time, but actually say what was behind that I didn't have time. Why? That's often not really the reason. There is something behind it. But it really comes up in research or quality improvement and even consultations. First, because there is underrepresented positions and opinions, but also because people are uncomfortable to do that in the traditional environment. So while talking to the patient advisor about this whole issue, I thought, oh, patients can actually help us with doing this. Maybe they can create this environment where participants would be more flexible to and more open to opening up, and also would be more willing to participate. And we are conducting this second study looking specifically at why people join self-management programs, and why not they complete them, why they work and why they don't. We just received ethics approval, and the whole idea is that we can actually break that barrier and that wall so that people are feeling comfortable to open up and actually share those deeper thoughts so that we can create the program that actually is helpful and useful and meets the needs of the patients instead of just being a check mark on the to-do list.
It's exciting that this work's moving forward. And lastly, I just wanted to ask if there's anything else that you would like to share with the audience that really stood out to you.
Sometimes PaCER research, it can be difficult in the sense that you meet and interact with people who have really suffered. And boy, you have to be a strong person to get through some of that. But other than that, it's a great improvement, I think, in terms of how health services can be improved and delivered anywhere in the world. Look to the patient, look to the person who is at the pointed end of the system.
I'd like to just build on what Jamie had mentioned around the impact of being on this team and working with the participants that we did. I've conducted a number of focus groups now. I've been in a number of interviews, but this one is, I don't know, it hits me a little bit differently. I can still picture the people who were in our focus groups and the stories they were sharing, which I think is what compelled us to go through the process of writing the manuscript and trying to get their stories out as much as we can, because we felt a personal connection with those participants, and we just felt like we were their voice to take it forward. And I know the team, we had to have some debrief sessions ourselves after those focus groups to process. And again, I know we brought up grief a number of times, but I think the team hadn't realized that they had been grieving, and they were struck by that piece as well, and needed some time to come to terms with that. So I don't know, this project really affected me, and I carry my learnings from it into every patient study I do going forward. So I'm just grateful that I got to work with this team about this topic at the time that I did.
Thanks, Marcia. And Elena, do you have any final remarks you'd like to share with the audience?
Probably just to say how amazing is the PaCER approach and the team that I've had a pleasure working with. This wasn't the first experience working with PaCERs, but every time I work with PaCERs, I learn something new, and I see how valuable and how useful and robust is the whole approach to this research. It might be different from how traditional academics look at it, but it is so valuable. And there might be some challenges with getting this framed as a traditional research or getting it published. I have to say, Marcia did an amazing job with putting this together as a paper, because often it doesn't fit in this structured methods, hypothesis, results approach, but there is so much value in it, and getting it together and getting it out is really, really important. So I appreciate everyone's effort doing this work and actually being open to continue working with Alberta Pain Strategy to inform the next steps of our work.
Thanks so much for being here, and hopefully we can talk to you again once you work through your project that you're working on now and bring you back for another episode to share that work. It'd be great to do a follow-up episode with all of you. So thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was fun.
Cassandra.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Pep Talks, the Patient Engagement Podcast. Brought to you by the Alberta Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research Patient Engagement Team. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you found it, and we hope you'll join us again for more interesting discussions about patient engagement in health research and healthcare.